It definitely made me distrust men a lot, and I wish it didn't. I wish I could sort of go out into the world and sort of naively stand up and let somebody through, let somebody walk past me without asking, are they going to touch me? Or, you know, when somebody sidles up too close to me on a train, when of course everything is crowded, you know, I don't wonder, like, is this person going to reach their hand over and do this thing again, you know? So it makes me afraid. It makes me afraid to, I know a lot of people who are afraid to walk down the street, but it makes me particularly afraid to walk down the street because it would feel like a great shame if being sexually assaulted were to happen twice. Yeah. Once, for whatever reason, feels okay, like it happened and it wasn't my fault, whatever. But if it were to happen twice, it would be like it was somehow, this time was my fault. I felt like I gave him the opening to touch me because I stood up to let him go by. We were in a cramped space and I stood up and I sort of presented my whole body and was very vulnerable, and he touched me, you know? And it was sort of like, well, if I had stood up and turned my back to him as opposed to like presented my front, then that wouldn't have happened. Or maybe when he had touched me, instead of freezing up, which is of course a very natural reaction, what if I had shouted? My mother's first reaction was to say, why didn't you scream? Why didn't you kick? Why didn't you put up a fight? Yeah. And I think that has stuck with me a lot. I mean, she has since apologized for that, but it's really stuck with me, this idea that if something were to happen in the future, well, I don't want to have to think, why didn't I do X? Why didn't I do Y? Yeah. There were definitely moments where I sort of thought, like, why did you do this to me? Yeah. Moments where I would cry in front of my boyfriend, you know, and and moments where I would feel sort of sexually broken. Then I think, like, why would you have to do this to me? Why did you have to pick someone like me, you know? Yeah. But at the same time, the person who was right next to me was my sister. And sometimes, like, I think my biggest thought is, thank God he picked me. Thank God it wasn't my sister, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, I can take this, you know? But, like, and it's not that my sister's not strong, but holy shit, like, I don't know what I would have done if he had done that to my sister. My first thought was this an accident? Why do I feel so weird if it was an accident? After sitting down and freezing and really thinking about it and crying a little actually about it, I did decide to go tell someone. Yeah. And when the police came to arrest this man, they asked me if I wanted to press charges, and I didn't because I felt so guilty. I was like, what if I was wrong? You know, what if it was an accident? Yeah, what if it was an accident? What if, you know, what if I had just imagined it? That was one of the big things I sort of asked myself. There was so much confusion that I felt around this one act.
Then when did it kind of like dawn on you that it wasn't just an accident, that it was on purpose?
So right after he touched me, he went behind a bookshelf to masturbate. And because I was 12 at the time, I didn't really understand what was happening. Like, I saw him gripping his penis, but something didn't register.
When you hear things in the news, someone may use terms like a monster or he was an animal, things like that. Do you think these kind of like words, I guess, like describe your person or at all, or what do you think about it?
I really try very hard to think of him as a person. Not just for him, or not at all for him, but really for me. Because him being a monster, like, monsters are things that you can't get away from. You know what I mean? Monsters live in your closet or under your bed, and if you ever have a dream where you're being chased by a monster, no matter how far you run, the monster always catches up to you. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, he was a really flawed human being who probably had really awful stuff happen to him in his life. It's much more comforting to me to feel that he hurt me because someone else had hurt him, you know. I feel like in my mind I don't want to say that I've forgiven him. That's not right. But I've decided that he does not have power over me. And I've decided that he probably didn't, he was probably a slave to his own desires. He probably had a lot of things in his life that didn't go right. I mean, he was homeless. I don't know what went on in his life, but it probably wasn't a good life. So what I really feel for him is pity. I just knew that I had these thoughts and that I had this experience, and that it just made me feel something that I don't think I can name even today. And I thought that I would never be able to go, move past that and have a relationship where I wasn't constantly crying and that I wasn't, freezing up in the middle of being touched, But it took some time and it took some experimentation and it took moving slowly and moving quickly and being with strangers and being with people who absolutely loved me and that I trusted and had to be with for months on end before we got to a point. It took a lot of things, but now I can have those relationships and I know that I can draw boundaries and that I know that I can assert myself and that my relationships now are not the same as that event and that event does not define me, even though it's definitely not something that you can ever, I think, get over, I know it eventually became really awful and very hard for me on complicated things in my relationships and how I dealt with people. It complicates how I still interact with strangers and being in tight spaces with people I don't know. That it's something that is surpassable, or surmountable.